Coming up on our next installment of America's Hope, should the Department of Education be disbanded? Well, there are some who claim that it should be because it is failing our children. We'll hear from Sheri Few to discuss why. And diversity, equity, and inclusion in 3D. Kevin McGary joins us to talk about why he believes that DEI, in its current form, is rooted in Darwinism and Marxism. All that coming up on America's Hope. Good evening, I'm Kelly Wright, and this is America's Hope. We're glad that you can join us this hour. We hope that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family. You know, we want to talk about education tonight, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to hear from some guests who have different things to say that might surprise you, enlighten you, inform you, and perhaps even inspire you. For example, what's the proper way that the Department of Education should be teaching our children and our parents being involved? So tonight we'll hear from someone who says the Department of Education needs to be disbanded, and she'll tell us why. And then we'll talk to another guest who will describe diversity, education, and inclusion in 3D. And you'll hear why he believes that the current form of DEI actually should be something that's rooted out of America, because he claims it has roots in Darwinism and Marxism. Heavy topics tonight. Let's get started. And welcome to America's Hope. My first guest is Sheri Few. She is president and founder of the United States Parents Involved in Education, USPI.org. I love that. Whose mission is to end the U.S. Department of Education and all federal education mandates. You might be asking why. We're here to talk to us about it. Is Sheri. Sheri, let's begin there. Why do you want to end that?
Well, I've been involved with education policy for more than 20 years. And in my experiences and those of my colleagues that helped me to form this national organization, we recognize that most of the nefarious pedagogies that concern us originate from the federal government, and they're incentivized with federal dollars. And, you know, the Federal Department of Education is unconstitutional. We know that it should never have been instituted. It's only been in place since 1980. And many have said that they would like to shutter the Department of Education, but who has actually developed a plan to do that? And I'm here to say that our organization has, and we understand that that's important because we must restore parental and local control to education.
And let's continue on with that component of restoring parental education, because you're the founder of the United States Parents Involved in Education. That is so important. Why do you believe in this current day in which we find ourselves living that the Department of Education has tried to remove parents from being involved in their children's education?
Well, it's a very deep and dark issue. We believe that there is an intentional agenda, and it's driven by the left. And the left would really like to change our form of government. And so we know historically it's happened in other countries when a dictator or a regime wants to oust the current form or the current occupant of the leadership in their government. They will use classrooms and education to indoctrinate children, to fill them full of lies, propaganda, and turn them against their country and one another. And that's exactly what we're seeing in government schools today. You know, the critical Marxist theories have sort of overtaken the curriculum and have been embedded throughout every subject at every grade level. And that agenda is to pit people against one another, people groups. And that's the critical Marxist theory, is to cause the divide and pit groups against one another. And then a rescuer can come in and take over, and we have an authoritarian form of government that takes place to come in and make peace. So unfortunately, we're seeing this alive and well in our country, and it's very sad, and it is a deep issue, but I think that is the intentional agenda of the left. And we know that Marxists and communists have no place for God. And so it's really an attack on our Judeo-Christian values and everything that this country was founded on. They want to erase that so that they can come in with a different form of government.
And we see that people in mass on college campuses and even some high school campuses are displaying their disdain for Jewish people. Do you think some of that is because of the educational system that's out there? People aren't really getting a real understanding of history, and some of this has seeped into the classroom?
Absolutely. I believe with all my heart that what we are seeing on high school and college campuses is a direct result of what children are being taught, and what they're being taught from a very young age all the way through their college career. And in our country, I've spoken about this a lot and had a lot of time to think about it. For decades, we have known that the colleges and universities are steeped with liberal professors. And we just, I guess, decided that there was nothing we can do about it. It's free speech. And we turned a blind eye to it. But now that we've seen it trickle down into K-12, the red flags are coming out and people are concerned and beginning to really put everything together. So, when we fought the Common Core standards back in 2010, I don't know if you remember that battle. But many of us were very concerned about these national standards. And those standards at every grade level have a standard that teach young children that they should be equipped and prepared to address societal ills and be activists for change in our country. So we're talking about kindergartners begin with this standard. And then they're taught that all the way through the 12th grade. And then they go into these very liberal colleges and universities. And then we see what we're seeing today in the streets and on the college campuses, these protests. These children are doing exactly what they've been taught to do, to be social justice warriors, and that justice comes at any cost, and that includes violence. And it's very sad, but we're seeing it played out in the streets today.
Including calling evil right and good, it would seem. But look, I don't want to get deep in the weeds on that. I want to stay focused on the educational component. U.S. PI has established 20 state chapters so far, and you're growing rapidly amid the national outcry from parents who want to regain control of their children's education. There's nothing wrong about that, but why do people accuse this organization of being wrong for trying to give parents their right to be involved in their child's education in a responsible way?
Well, it's a very interesting dichotomy because, United States parents involved in education, because we speak out against pornography, sexualization of children, critical Marxist theories, anti-American propaganda. Because we're speaking out against these things, we have actually been labeled domestic terrorists, and we've been put on the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate list. And the FBI and the CIA look at this list published by the Southern Poverty Law Center, and those are the people that they look after and domestic. So they're watching us and our actions. The irony of it, because then you have these students, high school students and college students, supporting and sympathizing with actual terrorists. So, and I'm a bit livid, quite frankly, that our country is allowing this. I think that it's nearly kin to treason what we see, and you don't know who to blame, because the kids have been taught this since they were very young. So really, is it their fault? But there ought to be consequences for adults who, and including the professors that are supporting all these actions, who are supporting terrorist organizations that want death to America. they are the true terrorists. They are domestic terrorists. They're aligning themselves with terrorists. And again, it's difficult to know who to blame, because they were very young children when their minds were forming. They were taught that this is the way they should behave. But that's why our organization is full of volunteers. And even myself, I'm a volunteer. I'm not a paid director, but my heart is very passionate, and all of our leaders are, about stopping this. We're concerned for the very freedom of our country. So we work very hard, and we are calling on others to join our efforts. So as you mentioned, we have over 20 state chapters. We're adding them all the time. We'd love for people to go to our website that want to help. The website is USPIE, that's USPI.org. They can go there and find resources for what to do in their local communities. They can look to see if there's a chapter in their state, and we'll get you connected with those people. Or if there's not a chapter, we'd love to talk with you and help you to establish a chapter in your state. And beyond that, we developed a documentary. It's Truth and Lies in American Education. It is really a good starting place for people who don't understand how critical this issue is. The film can be found at truthandliesfilm.us. And I give permission to anyone who buys a DVD to show it in large audiences. There's no licensing fee required, because we just want to get the truth out to as many people as possible. So start there by educating yourself, get connected with like-minded people through our organization. And we've even developed a blueprint of how to close the U.S. Department of Education, and most recently, a blueprint to show states how they wean themselves off the federal funding. And this is a good time for this publication to be coming out, because there are a few states already that are beginning to think about this. Is it worth the little bit of money we receive from the federal government to cede control of our classrooms? So we have policy statements. We're trying to influence legislation in states to protect parental rights, to protect children, and to protect our country's freedom. So we would love for your viewers to join us in our fight. We really believe it's a spiritual battle. It is a battle of evil and good. And as you alluded to earlier, we see that, we're in that phase in the Bible where it talks about people will be calling evil good and good evil. So, the spiritual battle is upon us. And if you feel called to what we consider a ministry to join us and help our efforts, we pray that you will visit our website. Again, it's USPIE.org.
I'm talking to Sheri Few of USPI. We're coming back with more of her discussion about education in America in just a moment. And welcome back to America's Hope. I'm talking to Sheri Few, who created United States Parents Involved in Education. It's a nonprofit nationwide coalition that seeks to return education to its proper local roots. So I want to talk to you more about your vision, what you just put out there. You made the vision very plain, and now you're trying to fill people with the knowledge about it, and with wisdom and understanding of what has to be done to save the children. Is USPI part of that, addressing the call and telling parents to do their level best to save their children from a world that is teetering on the edge?
Oh, absolutely, and amen to that. That's why I said we consider it a ministry, what we're doing. And, we don't recommend that any parent have their children in government schools today. It is that bad. It is a very toxic environment, and they have to find alternative ways to educate their children. We support homeschooling. We support private and Christian schools. We've sponsored, well, we haven't sponsored, but we have worked on legislation that will enable parents to better afford these alternatives. And, we're doing all we can to come alongside those parents. But in the meantime, they have to protect their children and not put them in that environment. We also have another project that we launched in March called the Millstone of the Month Award, which is titled after, the scripture in Matthew that says anyone that brings harm to children may as well have a millstone tied around their neck and thrown into the depths of the sea. And while that sounds radical, it is absolutely what we believe. And unfortunately, there are a number of nominees every month for that award that are just being absolutely hurtful to children and harming children. And so it is a biblical precept, and we're trying to call attention to those that aren't suffering any consequences for the nefarious things that they're doing toward children.
I have to follow up on that because, as you know, human trafficking is so widespread now, and child exploitation is so widespread now. Are you still, or are you seeing examples of that happening in educational circles? Because it is something that we have to be mindful of how we must be more proactive and more aware as parents what's happening to our children online as well as offline, even in classrooms or in a school setting where there are people trying to lure children into, there are child predators out there trying to lure children away from their families and putting them in harm's way through child exploitation and human trafficking.
Well, we have witnessed the sexualization of children. It's been happening in government schools for a couple of decades now, but it is definitely accelerated in the last few years with the push for, the grooming children toward transgender lifestyles, and often done behind parents' backs. We have, in our film, we interview an attorney who started a pro bono law firm just for this purpose, to protect, to represent parents and protect children from these things that are happening in government schools. So, like I said, often it's without parental knowledge. Very young children, 10, 11-year-old children are being groomed and provided services and counseling to become a sex contrary to their biological sex without parental consent. So they're even putting a wedge between parents and their children. And so they're separating parents from their children, and that certainly sets them up to be vulnerable and become a victim to sex traffickers. And what's worse than that is the influence in sex education is not just from the federal government, but it comes all the way from the United Nations and the World Health Organization and UNESCO, which is their education arm.
You've given us an understanding of some of the solutions that are out there, and thank you for sharing that with us. But I'd like you to also share your hope for America. Despite the fact that things look desperate and that there's despair, does hope still prevail?
Absolutely. Hope will always prevail. And, that's where we have an advantage over others, those of us who are believers, is we know that we have a hope and a future. And as long as God is on the throne, there's nothing that's too difficult to accomplish. And the good news is we see lots of parents rising up and speaking out more than ever before, and people are not tolerating it. Even at their own peril, they're being threatened and things because of their speaking out, but they are, and they're bold and they're courageous. And I see a movement afront, and I love that some of our legislators are beginning to listen and understand and making some of the necessary policy changes. And I think we're on the verge of seeing, and I didn't think I'd see in my lifetime where people would understand that the government schools really are a detriment to our country. And we spend so many billions of dollars every year on government schools, and we have to demand that they are eradicated and become, again, a safe place for children to learn and grow.
Sheri Few, President and Founder, United States Parents Involved in Education. USPI.org is where you can contact her. Sheri, we appreciate you coming on the program and enlightening us and informing us. And thank you for being on America's Hope.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be back with more in just a moment. Kevin McGary is a ministry leader, entrepreneur, author, and public speaker in the arena of civic engagement. He serves as chairman of the Frederick Douglass Foundation of California. He's an executive at the Douglass Leadership Institute and also a co-founder of Every Black Life Matters. And as I mentioned, he's an author with his latest book, DEI in 3D. Kevin, good of you to join us this hour on America's Hope. Welcome to the program.
Brother Kelly, it's so good to be here. I am honored to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, so talk to me about your new book, DEI in 3D. What is that particular book about? I'm assuming you're holding it up for us. I'm assuming you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in 3D. What does that look like from your perspective?
This is trying to take a cogent, practical, principled look as to what diversity, equity, and inclusion is and what is not. So this is I use 3D because, as you know, 3D goggles or 3D vision gives you an in-depth look at whatever it is you want to investigate. And so I use that premise to just look. We just want to figure out what diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, what it fundamentally is, from its foundations to its inner workings to its, its edifice, its ceiling, what kind of a thing this is, and whether indeed our business needs it, or whether we could adapt it, use parts of it, or whatever it is. So this book takes you through the entire sort of life cycle, if you will, of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Helps you to understand the distinctions between the words individually and how how they culminate into what is currently today a DEI movement within your major HR departments, not just here in America, but around the world. So this is a pervasive force. It is not something that people can say, well, I'm kind of out of the workforce now. It doesn't really apply to me. I have my own business. And stop that. It does apply to you. It applies to everyone. It is inescapable. When you have our government, this current administration has taken a all of government approach to diversity, equity, inclusion, including all departments and divisions within our government. It's pervasive. It's inescapable. You need to know what it is and how it may affect you and your family. So with that, that's what this book does.
And so, Kevin, in your book, you talk about what it is and you talk about why you have concerns about DEI. Explain that for us, please.
Yeah. So in the book, basically, I don't come up with concerns per se within DEI. I basically enunciate that, look, there's some demands, there are some designs, and there's some dilemmas. Those are the 3Ds. That's the other, distinction I use within the book. So it's 3D from an in-depth perspective, and then there's demands, designs, and dilemmas of DEI. The other 3Ds I use to kind of launch into a thorough investigation of what DEI is and what it's not. So what I've done is I've taken a look at the foundations. Okay, why do we even come to a point where we think, diversity is really, really a problem? We really need to address it. We need to go through extra effort, intentional efforts via these DEI approaches to really correct things that have been purportedly wrong. So we take a look at that. Where did all this stuff start from? And the readers will know very quickly the foundations and the cornerstone of DEI are actually those that have been put up by people who they currently herald and adore historically. And that would be people like Charles Robert Darwin. Now, some people would say, well, come on, we were not diverse when Darwin was writing. Yeah, you're right about that. But for the first time in human history, we had a scientific mind who was renowned, being looked at and listened to based on his proclamations. One of his proclamations was, look, blacks, they're subhuman. Based on my evolutionary theories, you see it in effect. Look at the blacks. They're subhuman. They're still trying to climb the evolutionary scale. They are gorillas, apes, and savages. Basically drawing a distinction between blacks and these other, animals. And this is Darwin. This is in his book on the Descent of Man, his second book. And so when you have that being heavily influenced within cultures and society worldwide, then you are obviously going to have a different when we went did ultimately in slavery and go through Reconstruction, blacks were not viewed as potentially a valuable person to bring in the workplace. They were viewed as they're black. I mean, come on, they're not serious. They're still trying to climb the scale. I mean, these we and so we were neglected, ignored. We were maligned and abused within the workplace when we actually did have the opportunity to participate there. So that's the sordid history of how we got here. I mean,
So,
this
so
is
Kevin,
yeah,
let me unpack that a little bit. You're talking
yeah,
about Charles Darwin, of course. His theories are widely known, albeit they were they cast a lot of aspersions, as you talked about, on Black Americans and Black people in general. But he also talked about survival of the fittest. How does Darwinism fit into today's uh, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion? And if so, why should it be an alarm bell to all Americans, regardless of their color of skin or their ethnicity?
well, so here's how it really fits. It's set up the premise that blacks can be and should be treated unequal, right? Because they're not equal. They evolved last, and so therefore they're not equal to us supremes, whites, in Charles Darwin's vernacular and in Karl Marx's vernacular, who was Darwin's mentor, by the way.
So the
I
connection
mean,
is now okay. So now we're seeing the connection here: Darwin and Karl Marx, and
yeah,
together both of these philosophers, for lack of a better word, or
yeah.
pseudoscientists, for lack of a better word, who thought they could massage a better society. Marx, of course, leading to Marxism, and Darwinism complementing that. Where does this stand in today's DEI?
Yeah, so when Marx basically took Darwin's major proclamations, inculcated it into his collective action that he wanted to see within workplaces and within societies worldwide, because again, Karl Marx, his primary economic theory was, look, the utopia can be and should be a communist takeover of all capitalist free market type societies. People don't understand why Marx did that. If you understood that he was perpetually aggrieved, never worked, and he always resented people who actually went out and made a success of themselves. He had a lot of bitterness and hatred toward people who were capitalists, and especially those who were successful. So because he had all these children, I think it was five or seven children that he had with he and his wife, and his other illegitimate child that he had with his live-in maid that he didn't pay a plug nickel, even though she slaved over him and his family for over a decade. He said, "Look," and he was a moocher. He mooched off his parents to pay for his illegitimate son, his live-in lover, and his wife and kids. Uh, you then begin to see, oh, okay, this guy was basically a loser, and he was trying to come up with economic theories that would take the responsibility off of personal responsibility and put it onto a larger edifice like a state, a nation state. So he said, look, government should be running everybody, and everybody should have a level playing field, so to speak. He said, we can bring this about through collective action in the workplace, so collectively, rioting or collective chaos, if you will, that we can cause. That will ultimately cause a collapse of things as they are, and then allow us to usher in this communist utopia. So when
So
you consider that, and you consider what's happening within DEI today, you consider the fact that most of the aggressiveness about DEI being fully enshrined in most of our organizations today is all collective thought, right? They're saying, look, we have to do this because, clearly blacks are still not represented at the highest levels within our organizations like they should be. We need to just place them in these in these areas of responsibility, whether or not they're competent doesn't matter. They need to be placed in these roles and positions within corporate America or within these organizational entities to be represented. So that's where it kind of comes in. And there's a lot more to it. That's a lot. I'm trying to unpack in just a little bit of time to kind of whet your appetite for what you need to understand about history. But all of this is neatly woven in, and the dots connected fully when you go through and actually read about it.
We got to get the book. I'd recommend anybody to read it to get your perception of DEI in 3D. I'm talking to Kevin McGary. We're going to take a break, and when we come back from the break, we'll unpack this a little bit more, and what your concerns are going forward as it relates to corporate America, government America, all of America. Back with more in just a moment. Welcome back to America's Hope. So I'm having this fascinating conversation with Kevin McGary. He's a ministry leader. He also works with the Frederick Douglass Association, the Leadership Institute as well. But he's also an author, and he's written his latest book, DEI in 3D, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. And so, Kevin, in the previous segment, you were making the assertion that you see DEI in its current form, where all hands are on deck from a government perspective to make America more diverse in the workplace. You're basically, if I hear you correctly, your book is asserting that this is a plan that basically states Darwinism and Marxism interfering with government as well as with the American people. Is that correct? Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, I would say it's more. It's the plan is here. It's precipitated because of the foundations of both Darwin and then Marx, his protege that came along later, and then put the pedal to the metal.
So for the other side, for example, might say, well, we understand what you're saying, but the government would say that no, we're trying to diversify our workforce because there are qualified African Americans, Asian Americans, Latino Americans, female Americans, white Americans, all of them qualify for certain positions, and we want to be sure we get the best and the brightest minds to work in our government workplaces without any reference to Marxism or Darwinism. So when you make this assertion, where is the rubber that meets the road in this?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So I would agree that, look, if you have sincere, principled people in our HR departments, either in government or in private sector, who are looking for just the best qualified candidate, and they're trying to be more intentional about diversity, wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. We should have respect for diverse ideas, philosophies, principles, political backgrounds. All of that needs to be woven into our organizations so we can have a real flourishing, a menagerie of humanity that brings a real flourishing of ideas and perspectives to whatever problems we're trying to solve. That's great. But the problem with DEI, as it's currently being implemented, and it's not the diversity or the inclusion part. It's not the D and the I part. It's the equity piece. What equity is inferring today and how it's being rolled out is, the old meritocracy stuff. You have to be competent. You have to have a demonstrated skill set. You have to have, those types of outcomes that are obviously present before you're elevated. That's old school. What we want to do is we want to take, for instance, a janitor and put them on the board of directors, or, I'm using that as a really, extreme analogy.
Yeah, that is extreme because it has happened, and the janitors turned out to be a very good CEO. So one could argue that as well. I guess
not typical.
Not typical, but it does happen. This is America, as the late great Don King used to say. Only in America can we see these kinds of things happen. But look,
so
speaking of,
is,
go ahead.
So the problem is when you have you want equal outcomes, which is all communist, trope. With equal outcomes is a communist trope, right? As opposed to true equality, equal opportunity. So when you posed it and you says, look, we have all of these diverse, ethnicities that make up, the United States. Why can't we just make sure that we are intentional about bringing diversity to the table? That's wonderful. But when you try to equalize the outcomes, that becomes a problem, because then now you're saying, look, it doesn't matter what somebody's core competency, skill set, or their talents really may be. We need this type of gender or this type of a race or ethnicity at the table at these levels. When you try to orchestrate that in that way, then that causes a big problem, because now you
Yeah.
have people that are not there based on merit being placed there based on outcomes.
So you're
And this
forcing
goes
the
completely
issue.
against Dr. MLK when he says, "Look, let's look at each other based on content of character, not the color of skin." And this goes completely against, obviously, the American ethos, which is has a lot to do with labor discrimination laws and everything else. So now we're introducing a whole nother element that is a real problem for organizations.
Yeah, so you're basically what I'm hearing you then, if I'm tracking with you, it's a forced equity, which then makes it a false equity, and it ultimately leads to, getting back to your point, some of the tenets of Marxism and Darwinism. So from that perspective, Kevin, what would be your suggested or recommended solution to implementing a DEI program in not only 3D but in fairness and
Yeah,
true equality?
yeah. So what? There's a couple things. So there's some dilemmas that are presented with DEI. Okay, and that I expose in the book. And there is a fair way to do a DEI type program. I would advocate that you take the E out altogether, because we're not going to just put people that are incompetent, unskilled, and everything else in positions of power, because you have to have a demonstrated level of competence to be anywhere. I mean, we need meritocracy. So we're not throwing out meritocracy. Let's put that
Right.
back in. And what we want to do is emphasize DOI, diversity, opportunity, maximum opportunity, intentional opportunity for everyone, and inclusion. So what I mean by that is, this does away with the old boy network. Okay, this does
Gotcha.
away with, hey, let's, my golf buddy I'm going to play golf with, or I'm going to have some drinks with, and I'm telling him, look, my son's graduating next June. I need you to go ahead and get him a place, and the guy said, oh, no problem, Kevin. He's in. By the way, I know you're ahead of this organization too. So when my daughter graduates in 2 years, we're good. See, this kind of stuff needs
Yeah.
to stop, because what that does is it doesn't create maximum opportunity. It really inculcates an old boys network that really does then enshrine people of the same mindset, the same idea, the same networks within our organization. So our organizations turn out to be big old networks of people that are all inclined to congregate in the same arena. So we really need to do away with that. If we're sincere, we stop that. All right. We make sure that when we have a job opportunity, it's okay if we have friends and family and all that, and they want to come in. Great. This is the job requirement, and yeah, please, apply. But we're going to pick the best, absolute best fit, with an intention towards diversity, but not, diversity is not the thing, right? So that's number one. Number two is, people that are sincere as DEI executives must. This is not even, you can't equivocate this one away. This is not optional. This is a matter of fact must, by virtue of who you say you are. You say you're wanting maximum diversity, all diversity. You say you're wanting maximum equity of equal outcome, whatever, and you're saying you want maximum inclusion. That means that you cannot be partnered with Planned Parenthood, because They're completely against your mission. Now, this is not arguable. Okay, Planned Parenthood to this day is their primary. They were founded on the mission of exterminating the Negro population. Their founder, exact words, that's what she said, Margaret Sanger. So, with that in mind, then, if there's an emphasis, if there's a strategy, right now to this day, where Planned Parenthoods are 90% are within walking distance of Black and brown communities, there's some kind of plot here that is not. It's strategic. It is not by chance. That means that anyone who is sincere about DEI cannot, by virtue of who you say you are as a diversity person, be partnered or even in any way support an organization that is trying to precipitate Black and brown genocide. It makes no sense. So if you're sincere, you stop. Period. Now, the other thing that we need to do for people, the other dilemma that you need to address as a DEI executive is, if you're sincere, you would make sure that we have school choice programs and parental choice programs that you as a DEI executive support. Because here's the thing. We want to make sure that everyone in the Black and brown communities, and especially in the Black community, get an opportunity at an equal, level to participate in higher levels of education. So when we do ultimately go to that college and get skilled and competent, we have the same, level set as others who have gone to those, better schools and colleges all along the way. So in order for us to participate equally, because that's what we say we want, we must then, as DEI executives, support parental choice and school choice programs so we can get those other ethnicities involved at an earlier stage and level the playing field at the education level, not later on when we try to just place them in a board of directors.
In terms of what you talked about tonight, DEI, and then changing to DOI, opportunity. And that's exactly what many people want. They want the equal opportunity and don't put people into positions just for the sake of equity. And meritocracy, the old-fashioned way, you earn it. I hear you loudly and clearly, and the book again is called?
It's called DEI in 3D, and you can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it on our website, everyblm.com. And the organization I run, that I started as the righteous and faithful alternative to Black Lives Matter, is Every Black Life Matters. Okay, we're completely opposite. We're the righteous and faithful alternative.
What is your fundamental hope for America?
Fundamental hope is that we absolutely, positively reject any and all forms of Marxism, number one, okay, because that's happening globally and it's a problem, all right? Number two is that we come to recognize that we're all, created equal in the eyes of God. We're all part of the human race, and that we begin to respect each other as such, not this paradigm where you're white so you're less than, or you're black so you're less than. That has to stop. Number three is that we really need to connect again, fathers with their children, so we can build in a sense of community again and family again. We can start at that level. So there's some things that we can do, and that will make a difference.
Kevin, I want to thank you for coming on the program tonight and sharing your insights into what's going on and having the boldness and the courage to state it as you see it. Welcome that to our show, and don't be a stranger. There's a lot more for you to talk about, obviously. So we'll invite you back again, Kevin McGary. Love having you on. And again, thank you for sharing some very poignant insights, from a historic perspective, also from just what's happening in America right now. But I like the fact that you're hoping that America can continue to move forward. That is the bottom line, that we must move forward.
Absolutely.
Kevin McGary on tonight's America's Hope. Thank you. We're back with more, with my final word in just a moment. And welcome back to America's Hope. I'd like to thank our guests tonight, Kevin McGary, as well as Sheri Few. In summing up tonight, my final word would be this. Make sure that we're helping all parents be involved in their child's education. It will benefit our local communities. And if it comes to DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, perhaps Kevin McGary has a good point. Opportunity, equal opportunity for all. And by the way, keep hope alive. Let it prevail. Good night, America. Your America and my America.
United we stand, divided